Hello and welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. We are finally reviewing A Complete Unknown. I want to call it a biopic of Bob Dylan, but it isn't really a biopic. It's a biopic of essentially a 4-year slice of his very long life from 1961 to 1965. It stars Timothée Chalamet as the ubiquitous troubadour, the singer-songwriter, the folkster, the balladeer, and all that malarkey. It also co-stars Edward Norton. You've also got Elle Fanning in there. We've got Monica Barbaro. Boyd Holbrook is in there too. And this is directed by James Mangold. And I thought I'd just take a quick kind of tour of some of his previous films to see. I've not felt particularly enamoured with James Mangold as a director. He did Copland years ago. I had the great fortune of interviewing Sly Stallone and Robert De Niro at Cannes for that film. I didn't realise it was his film. He directed The Wolverine. He directed Logan, which was kind of considered one of the first intelligent superhero films, if you like, psychoanalytical, if you like. He did Ford v Ferrari, which was good. I liked it. He did Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, a really missed opportunity there. So he hasn't done any, he's not a favourite. He's not a favourite. I wouldn't say he's an auteur. I'd say he's an efficient he did Walk the Line, of course, the Johnny Cash biopic with Joaquin Phoenix, which I think did Joaquin Phoenix win the Oscar for that. I wasn't a Johnny Cash fan, so I haven't seen it. Can't say I've seen it, but I know a lot of people are talking about this in the same breath as that because it was another biopic that he made. And Johnny Cash appears in this film, played by Boyd Holbrook. We watched the trailers. You guys shot me down in flames when I said I don't get it. I don't understand I understand he's huge. I understand he's loved and that he's talented and he's skillful, but his type of music, the sound of his music, even the era of his music was just not my thing. I was never really a folkster, acoustic / electronic kind of Bob Dylan fan. I just wasn't. It just was never my sort of thing. But to that extent, one can still not like someone or not like someone's music and appreciate it, especially when you go to see a film like this. So my trailer reactions were very much those of a layman who knows not a lot about Bob Dylan other than what we all kind of know about Bob Dylan. But this would hopefully give me put a little bit more meat on the skeleton, if you like, of my skeletal knowledge of Bob Dylan. So any Bob Dylan fans here, bear with me. So what is this? This is, as I say, an up-close and personal portrait of 4 years in his life, ending really at the Newport Folk Festival at the moment he went electric. And this is a big deal in the world of folk music. It was a big deal. My mother, Nanny, died when we watched the trailer. She said it was a big deal. You can't be a folk singer and plug in into an amp and go electric, can you? Isn't it funny? These things now would seem such a sort of rarefied kind of odd kind of controversy, but at the time, clearly it was a big deal. To go electric was to be considered selling out. And so this is a film about that 4-year period where really Bob Dylan goes from a sort of strumming troubadour in jazz clubs and folk clubs in New York, Greenwich Village, to a superstar. And the way in which his embracing of the electric sound was perhaps part of that, not part of that, was considered a sellout, not a sellout, etc., etc. So going into this, I have to say, I wasn't particularly excited. And out to 2 hours, 20 minutes of biopic about a rarefied chunk in a musician I'm not a huge fan of's life. But I tell you what won me over quite quickly in this was its sense of era. I know we talk a lot with sort of sci-fi films and fantasy films about the universe building and how important that is to get you comfortable with what happens and whether it be ridiculous or what. You know, the believability of that universe is key to getting on board with some of the most extraordinary sci-fi fantasy films ever. In a weird way, the same with period pics, and this is a period film, 1960s New York, essentially. And what won me over quite quickly was this film's attention to detail. I know New York quite well, and so it was really nice to be taken back in time, to have scenes and street shots and exteriors, the Chelsea Hotel, parts of New York embedded and soaked in 1960s-ness. It felt like a real sort of trip back in time, and I think that's a huge tribute to the production design, set design, costumes, everything here. Nothing felt artificial. There were no dodgy wigs. Everything felt very real and very authentic. And then in the middle of this lands a sprightly Bob Dylan in the form of Timothée Chalamet. Now, the thing about Timothée Chalamet, I don't know if anyone else gets this, I always kind of think these days, oh, it's a Timothée Chalamet movie, a bit like I do with Zendaya. And I think, oh, I'm just going to get a Timothée Chalamet movie. And then each time I go and see one, I'm always overly impressed. He always manages to make me feel very comfortable with whatever role he takes on, whether that be Willy Wonka as a classic example. I wasn't expecting to enjoy that as much as I did, but the reason I think I did was less about the film around it, but the commitment that he gives as a performer. And I think that's what makes Timothée Chalamet stand head and shoulders above many other actors. He is committed to the role. And for the first half of this film, I was absolutely intrigued and interested, and I marvelled at the way in which Timothée Chalamet seemed to embody this kind of almost omnipotent kind of character. Because for me, Bob Dylan's always been this guy with weird hair and sometimes weird hats, who never does interviews, never talks, is always behind shades. Even when he sings, it's you don't get to know a lot about him. He's sort of omnipotent. He's a complete unknown, and yet he's known to everyone. I think that's a clever play on the title there. So this is very much, he lands in New York, it's 1961. He just goes directly to the bedside of Woody Guthrie, fabulous musician, and alongside him on his almost his deathbed, though it's a long 4-year deathbed. I don't know what it doesn't really make clear what Woody Guthrie's dying of. I suppose I could have looked it up. Was it consumption? Was it pneumonia? Was it TB? Something. And at his bedside is Pete Seeger, another name I've always heard. I didn't realise Pete Seeger was a banjo player, played by Edward Norton. Now, Ed Norton's brilliant in this. He's very sweet. I mean, Pete Seeger is just like, Pete Seeger, if he was like this, should have been presenting Play School or Sesame Street. He's just so soft. He's the exemplar of being a folksy man. He may as well wear dungarees and all that kind of stuff. And although I'm being a bit sort of sarcastic, I think if there was a problem I had with Edward Norton's performance it was a bit too twee and perhaps a little one-note saccharine, as he kind of, in a way, in an avuncular fashion, takes the young Dylan under his wings, takes him to his home, where he strums and does the origin story of a famous tune in Seeger's house, and they all look fondly. I mean, I have to say, moments like that, they were a bit kumbaya. It was a bit like, the Waltons. It was like watching the Waltons. It was like everyone sort of smiling. You know that moment in Airplane, the movie, where there's the girl singing and then there's the woman playing a guitar, and they're all grinning inanely. Now, anyone who knows me from the rest of the channel and not as just come into this as a film review will know that I have zero tolerance for people who just suddenly pull out a guitar and start playing a song. Well, you can't watch a Bob Dylan film without someone all the time just pulling out a guitar and playing a song. But the interesting thing about this is I didn't get a single moment where I got right armpit, which is telling something, which I'll tell you why that's significant. Every biopic has to find a way to access the tunes, the songs, the origin stories of the songs. I've often said Bohemian Rhapsody did it in the most awful way, where they'd all stand around each other in the kind of recording studio, go, oh, I've got an idea. Oh yeah, use that, Bob, and let's put that there. Put the drums on. Oh, we've created Bohemian Rhapsody. That's so cool. In this film, you get those moments where you feel this is the origin. He's in the foothills of writing the lyrics to a song that's going to become, like a rolling stone, a major hit. But it doesn't hit you between the eyes. And the other great thing is that Timothée Chalamet sings every single song. And what can sometimes happen with that is, in an actor's effort to sing everything, they cannot pay as much attention, if you like, to the rest of the performance. It's like everyone's like, oh my God, you come out of these songs and we go, God, he sang the song. Okay, well, that's good. Of course, it's impressive. But I think the judge of a good film, or my judgment of this film, isn't based on whether he was a brilliant singer of Bob Dylan's songs. He is. But certainly for the first half of this film, I thought he was also excellent in portraying the young, aspirant, fidgety, ambitious, quite selfish and self-serving. He was a little kind of oik, quite pushy. I mean, the fact that he's pushed himself alongside virtually onto the deathbed, beside the deathbed of Woody Guthrie, and then he's in Pete Seeger's house, and then he meets Elle Fanning's character, who he has a sort of long-term relationship with, and she's sort of very, she's an artist, but she's very sort of, and a teacher, I think, but she's very pure, she's very good, and he sort of shacks up with her for a bit, but when she goes off on a sort of work trip, he immediately shacks up with Joan Baez, brilliantly played by Monica Barbaro, who I don't know from anything else, but she's sensational as Joan Baez, incredibly enigmatic. I think I always remember my mum playing Joan Baez when I was young and me going, oh my God, she's so spiritually sexy. Well, clearly Bob Dylan thought so too, and they have a thing. But he doesn't care. He doesn't care that he's shagging Joan Baez in Elle Fanning's bed in her flat. So he's a tyke, and I like that about this film. It was like, okay, obviously Bob Dylan sanctioned it being made. He didn't mind being shown for what he was, which was a little bit of a rat, a love rat, if you like. So as a film, it wasn't afraid to show him as louche and kind of disloyal and manipulative, and willing to kind of do what he needed to do to serve his artistry. And this really is a film about Bob Dylan the artist, really, than Bob Dylan the man, which is why I keep saying, oh, the first half of the film I really enjoyed. When we hit that sort of midway point of 1965, so a couple of years have elapsed, he's become a household name, he's very successful, he's very famous. It's also the point at which he now has a fucking annoying pair of shades on his head, and he has John McEnroe's hair. And whilst it was all done very naturalistically, it didn't look like a wig, all that. Herein lies my problem. As soon as the shades came on, and as soon as we start to head towards the kind of the dramatic kind of pinch point of this film is about his inevitable moment when he goes electric at the Newport Folk Festival, and the shock and horror and upset that this would cause. As soon as he had his shades on, I felt that Timothée Chalamet's performance just suddenly depleted. He was asked, and this isn't a problem necessarily even with the directing or even with the story, this is what Bob Dylan becomes. There's lots of kind of shades of colour to the younger Bob Dylan as he's kind of having this relationship, trying to impress this person, signing up to this label, singing this song and all this kind of stuff. But by the time we get to him at 1965, he's become which we all know, the sort of monosyllabic, sunglass shaded kind of moody guy who just says nothing, smokes a cigarette and just hangs out in the shadows and then strums on a guitar, which is what he is, which is what Bob Dylan became. But it becomes quite one note, and it becomes quite boring to kind of follow this guy, and certainly becomes very difficult, I think, to care for him. And so, as I say, we hit 1965 and we're hurtling towards the going electric furore. And it's easy, I suppose now, as I said at the beginning, to not really understand why that was such a big thing, but by all accounts it really was. We're talking about 60s hippies and folksters here, easy to rattle them, I guess. And so Bob Dylan, but why was Bob Dylan drawn to electric? He just wanted to create the best music. He didn't care about genres, he didn't care about definitions of music, he didn't care that the paying public just wanted to hear him sing this song that was a classic of his, or that song. There's a lot in this film about, and I often think this with performers and bands, they go on stage and you see them on tour and they're like, we're not playing any of our old songs, we're only playing music from our new album, and you're like, as a punter, you're like, fucking hell, that's a bit boring because I only like this one from your first album. But from the point of view of Bob Dylan, the artist, he's not interested in that. He's not interested in that. And it's quite a good film for all of those things. I mean, a bit like Better Man, bizarrely, the Robbie Williams film. That is a film about how fame destroyed him in a boy band. This film is also about how fame puts pressures on even the likes of Bob Dylan to perform a certain type of folk music or acoustic music, and how even someone like Bob Dylan wanted to stretch the envelope, push the envelope and move into fresher, more kind of radical territories, which is why I quite liked his relationship with Johnny Cash in this. I mean, Boyd Holbrook plays Johnny Cash looking bizarrely like Jim Carrey at times, which I found completely kind of bemusing. But I thought he was good as this kind of, sort of rocker who kind of was inspiring to Bob Dylan, but was also super inspired by Bob Dylan himself. So you really feel in the second half, Bob Dylan being tugged away from what everyone wants him to be, even right down to his mentor in a sense, or his uncle, his musical guardian, Pete Seeger. Even Seeger kind of, has become a bit too boring. He's like an embarrassing folk parent. And you can see Bob Dylan, every time he sees him, kind of going, oh God, I suppose I have to go and talk to Seeger now. That's not to say there aren't moments with Pete. There's a wonderful, wonderful moment. One of my favourite scenes in this film was a moment where Pete Seeger runs this sort of community TV channel, and a blues singer comes in with a guitar because Bob Dylan isn't there. I think he's a replacement. He's got glasses on. I think he's blind, and he's just sat with a guitar, and he just drinks, and he's like, give me anything to drink as long as it's not pasteurized, which I thought was a hysterical line. And then Bob Dylan just turns up, and then this great jamming session develops, and I don't know, there were some really neat moments, neat sort of almost improvisational moments where you felt the characters and even, Timothée Chalamet were genuinely jamming or playing the guitars. And it must have been successful because I wasn't feeling anything eggy about these moments. They felt very cool. They felt very organic. They felt very authentic. They felt real to the plot. So that was quite successful. I didn't feel those kind of eggy moments like I do in most biopics, which is like, oh, this is the song creation moment. He doesn't spiral out of control, Dylan. He starts to smoke a lot more spliff, becomes more and more laid back to the point of barely emitting a word or a sound or a noise. He breaks Elle Fanning's heart. I thought Elle Fanning was really good, actually. She really, I really felt for her. I wanted her not to want him so that she wouldn't be hurt. I didn't want them to get together because I thought, God, you wouldn't want to be with him. He's a right old rat. I mean, it's not a very flattering portrait of Bob Dylan, and I think you have to give credit to Bob Dylan's estate for letting a not very flattering portrait of him be made, in a sense, because it doesn't happen often in a biopic. And so Chalamet is amazing, but it really is a film of two halves, and I much preferred the first half. I thought it was great on detail. I mean, it continues. The era detail is great throughout the second half. I mean, because I'm not into the music, I found it hard to get on board with how dramatic and contentious and controversial his move towards electric was, though of course it's historically interesting to see that it was. It was nice to park him geographically and in terms of year chronologically, where Bob Dylan was happening, when he was with Joan Baez, what was going on with her. There was a particularly strong scene where their on-off kind of lusty relationship, it's much more a lusty relationship than a loving relationship like Elle Fanning. Joan Baez is very much friends with benefits. There was a great moment where they're on stage together because they perform together an awful lot. And the crowd want them to perform classics, ones that they've done before, and Bob Dylan doesn't want to. And he storms off. He pretends that his guitar's broken. I thought, in a weird way, that gave us much. That was the biggest insight into Bob Dylan's personality for me in the second half of the film. There's some really neat, supporting characters. Dan Fogler was brilliant, who played his agent. He was brilliant. He was kind of, really kind of just business. But at the same time, I think what was interesting about this is that Bob Dylan was clearly a businessman. He clearly had aspirations, ambitions. He knew what he wanted to do to succeed. His idea of success, though, wasn't money for money's sake. And it wasn't necessarily ego's sake. He was clearly driven by the desire to just create the music he had to create. It was less about him wanting an ego trip, but it was more, what I was left feeling was that Bob Dylan's all about wanting to write the song that needs to come out of him at that point. And I think to that extent, I can understand, seeing this film, why so many people like Bob Dylan and don't see him in many regards as a sellout, because whilst the folk world saw him as a sellout, when you're that sort of rigid about musical genres and traditions, you end up becoming a bit of a snob, and then you can't embrace sort of, breakthroughs or an inventive approach to music. And I think what I saw in this was actually Bob Dylan wasn't just one thing, and I thought that was quite illuminating. It was quite interesting. I just didn't care for him in the second half. I found him really uninteresting, and as I say, and that sort of rubbed off on my kind of loyalty to Elle Fanning. I just felt like saying to her, just leave him. He's a pain in the arse. He's a complete fucking monosyllabic, arrogant cock. Just let him go. I also like the idea that, there's some big clues dropped within the film that he was also about managing, if you like, embellishing and lying on his character CV. I mean, who hasn't lied on their CV, say? But he's kind of lied. I mean, the most obvious being his name. I think his surname was Zimmerman, and he's become Bob Dylan. Speaks to a different past and a different origin story. There's a moment where Elle Fanning asks him about, I think it was Elle Fanning who asks him, or maybe it's Joan Baez, says, were you in a carnival? And he kind of looks a bit funny. They've gone to see a film called Now Voyager, where clearly their discussion, the Betty Davis film, is about, changing who you are, deciding you're going to be something different and all this kind of stuff, new starts. That thing that when people go to college, often it's an opportunity for a completely fresh start. And I think this is an interesting film to watch someone like Bob Dylan reinvent himself. So there's a reinvention right at the beginning of the film where he's kind of created a new persona. And then at 1965, he creates another new persona for himself again. And all of that's interesting, and all of it is interesting and admirable, to be a pure artist and all this kind of stuff. But if it means you're just a mute, eyeless, as in he's wearing shades all the time, singer who says very little, it's no wonder that I struggled to get close to him in the second half of this film. I found him very unsympathetic, but throughout it was a great era piece. It's an interesting film about Bob Dylan. It's a slice of, if you like, cultural history, with a really solid performance at the heart. And it's not that Timothée Chalamet didn't deliver on the goods in the second half. I just don't think, given what Bob Dylan became, there was an awful lot for him to give us. So it became less about Bob Dylan the man and more about how Bob Dylan managed his public profile and his career, really. A few cliched moments. I thought all the scenes around Woody Guthrie's bed were a bit kind of, mawkish and a bit sort of romantic, but you can forgive the film that. I thought Pete Seeger's character, Ed Norton, he was good, but it was a bit one note. It was a bit too goody. It was just like, I could have done with a scene where he told fucking Bob Dylan to shut the fuck up and fuck off, but maybe he didn't in real life. So I ended up feeling sorry for Pete Seeger, but also wanted to slap him at the same time. This wasn't as sinewy. I've said in the past about James Mangold, the director, I find he might be one of those guys who hides the smell of alcohol on his breath by using too much aftershave or something like that. I always remember as a kid thinking, I don't want to grow into a man who's concealing the smell of alcohol through using too much aftershave. And it's a weird thing to say. I don't know why I get that feeling about James Mangold, the director, but this wasn't as blokey as I thought it was going to be. I thought this was quite a respectful and quite an honest portrait of a man who doesn't give much away. I mean, I think what I came out of this realising is Bob Dylan's very secretive, very sort of earnest, very thorough in his artistry, but just holds everyone at arm's length, and that's okay. I think, but I could have done with a little bit more probing, if not in the performance of Bob Dylan, but around him. I thought we could have done with a little bit more probing of, well, what's actually making this guy tick? Why is he quite happy to kind of offend everyone? Why is he not affected or really moved that much by Elle Fanning or Joan Baez? Or he seems quite sort of, at times he seems quite sociopathic in a sense. But all of that said, it was better than I thought it was going to be. And as I say, I think it's a slice of cultural history. And Tim Chalamet is, as ever, he's just such a safe pair of hands. With every film I see him in, even if it's a film I'm not drawn to like this, he just holds your hand and takes you through it so sort of reliably, in a sense. And I felt like I went on a journey back in time to 1960s New York, and because I know New York so well, it was really nice to see, obviously, what it might have looked like back then. So if I was to score this, I'd give it 76 out of 100.